The 1980s were a golden age for general aviation, and there was no place on earth quite like the Van Nuys Airport. It was a city within a city, a sprawling maze of hangars and flight lines that hummed with the sound of pistons and turbines from dawn until dusk. On this particular afternoon, the California sun was beating down on the tarmac, and I was just another pilot with a few hours to kill. I had just dropped off a Piper Dakota for a radio upgrade, and I decided to take a stroll through the hangars to see what was tucked away in the shadows. I didn't know it yet, but just around the next corner, I was about to have a conversation that would change the way I looked at aviation safety forever. This story dates back to the 1980s when I was an aircraft salesman out of Carson City, Nevada. On this particular day, I flew a Piper PA-28 236 Dakota down to the Van Nuys Airport to have a new radio installed. After delivering the aircraft to the avionics shop, I had the rest of the day to kill while waiting for the work to be completed, so I decided to take a walk. As I stepped out of the shop, my path took me through rows of hangars. Straight ahead, I spotted a Mercedes 450 SEL parked near a Cessna 182. A large man was hunched over the aircraft, clearly deep into some maintenance work. As I got closer, I realized this wasn't just a plain Jane 182. It appeared to be something special. I walked up to get a closer look. As I stood there admiring the airframe, the man working on the instrument panel turned around. He caught my eye and said, "Hi." I immediately recognized him as George Kennedy. Most people knew him as the Oscar-winning star of Cool Hand Luke, or the tough but fair mechanic Joe Petroni from the Airport movie franchise. What many didn't realize was that Kennedy was a pilot's pilot in real life. He had spent 16 years in the Army and originally wanted to be a World War II fighter pilot, but at 6'4", he was told he was simply too big for the cockpits of the era. I complimented him on his airplane, and his face lit up. He invited me to come closer so he could show me the improvements he'd made to the Skylane. I ended up spending a couple of hours that day talking aviation with George while he fiddled with the panel. His plane may well have been the best equipped 182 in the world at the time. He even had weather radar installed, along with just about every other modification available. The thing I remember most from that conversation was the way George looked at me, almost as if he was expecting me to ask why a man of his means didn't have a larger, faster aircraft. I didn't ask, but he answered anyway. "You know the reason I chose a Cessna 182 instead of a Citation?" he asked. "Well, I can easily afford a Citation, but I'd probably kill myself like Thurman Munson." Munson, the legendary catcher and captain for the New York Yankees, had been killed just a few years prior in 1979. He was practicing touch-and-go landings in his Cessna Citation when he stalled short of the runway in Akron, Ohio. He only had about 33 hours of experience in the jet at the time of the crash. George stated plainly that he was comfortable in his 182. The cabin fit a man of his size perfectly, and with all the safety equipment he'd installed, he felt it was the right tool for the job. It was a lesson in humility and knowing your limits, even when you have the world at your feet. As I walked away from that hangar and back toward the avionics shop, I couldn't help but think about the contrast between those two men. One was a legendary athlete at the top of his game who pushed into a complex jet with only 33 hours of experience. The other was a Hollywood icon who had the humility to stay in the cockpit, where he felt most at home. George Kennedy was a pilot's pilot. He understood that in aviation, your ego is the one thing that doesn't provide any lift. That afternoon in Van Nuys reminded me that the best aircraft in the world isn't the fastest one or the most expensive one. It's the one you can fly with total confidence and safety. It's a lesson that has served me well throughout my 40-year career in the sky. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Jim J Chronicles. If you enjoyed this look back at a golden era of aviation, please hit that subscribe button. I'll be back with another story next Sunday. Thanks for watching.